Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Graham again. So day 2, where are we? So in the Tyneside coastal town of South Shields, high above the southern bank of the River Tyne, stands an unmarkable statue of an elderly woman. Does anybody know where it is, and does anybody know who it is? The lady in question has a cheeky smile on her face, and her face is almost hidden behind a hand cooped to her cheeks as she gazed out over the River Tyne, when her other hand is in a fishing basket. Who is this lady? And why is there a statue of her in a non-prominent part of South Shields? So the story starts in 1782 in South Shields with the birth of a Dorothy Appleby, and she was born in Shadwell Street. And she was born into a town, South Shields, and we had a number of industries, particularly salt making, which was very high during the 17th and 18th century. Shipbuilding, fishing, and glass making were also very prominent industries in our town. So it is very likely that Dorothy's family would have worked in one of these industries. So in 1803, Dolly married Cuthbert, and Cuthbert was a fisherman. And Dorothy would have gone door to door selling a fish from a basket. So the fishing industry didn't exactly inundate its employers with money, so the Cuthberts had to find other activities to supplement their income. So smuggling. This is where Dorothy started to make a name for herself. So Dorothy began extensive trading in contraband goods. These goods were brandy, cigars, tobacco, and lace. She was a very well-known woman. She was a strong, muscular woman, and she was fearless. And this is most probably why she managed to get away with smuggling for so long. So near Marsden Bay, this was a very well-known smuggling part of the coast, and we believe that this is where Dorothy's smuggling activities happened. So obviously there was a lot of wars going on during that time, and there was a 12-year conflict between the Coatolian powers of Great Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, and the French Empire and all its allies. Up to 1 million British men fought in the war. Many of these men signed up to fight voluntarily. However, more often than not, the largely peaceful recruitment drives failed to recruit significant numbers of fighting men, and this basically led to men being brought up against their will and brought up into gangs to fight. So during the 17th century, the Crown believed it had a permanent right to seize men who had seafaring experience and force them into fight for the Royal Navy. So various acts of Parliament had been made, and this was actually official. Okay, so at some point between 1803 and 1808, Cuthbert had gained employment in the merchant fleet. So in 1808, he is shown in the records of the HMS Amelia as being pressed into naval services on the warships from a merchant boat from Quebec in Canada. So the HMS Amelia saw a lot of action during the war. In 1809, she took part in 3 sea battles, which involved the complete destruction of 2 French warships. Okay. HMS Amelia destroyed a big shore battery of guns, whilst a number of fire ships were sailed into a large French fleet, which were anchored up in a harbour, causing great disruption. Whilst all this was going on, Cuthbert was working amongst the dense smoke of a battle as a gunnery specialist. It was a very dangerous job, because the crash from French cannonballs would throw up lethal splinters of wood from the boat. Okay, so it is possible that Dorothy may have made an appearance on the HMS Amelia at this time, as it wasn't really unusual for women to serve on board with their husbands. However, as the Royal Navy didn't record women on their ships, there was nothing to confirm that Dorothy actually went on that ship, and it is likely that she was still back in South Shields. So there's a little story now about Dorothy. So it's said that there was a man running through the streets of South Shields trying to escape the press gangs that were chasing him when he bumped into Dorothy. Dorothy was a very quick thinker, so what she did was she lifted up a petticoat skirt, which was a very big volumized skirt, and told the man to hide under the skirt. As the press gangs came shooting round the corner, they bumped into an innocent looking Dorothy, who then sent these men off in completely the wrong direction looking for the man. So once the gang was out of sight, the man underneath the petticoats emerged back into the daylight and was sent in the opposite direction to the gang. So at some point in 1811, Cuthbert had managed to return home from his service on HMS Amelia. For a few months over the winter of 1811 and 1812, he would have a relatively quiet life in South Shields. However, another war loomed, and this time it was with the United States, and the press gangs were coming back. In March of 1812, a press gang that were known locally as the Hunters Gang was in hot pursuit of Cuthbert, who managed to make it into Dorothy's house in Shadwell Street. So single-handedly, Dorothy managed to keep the press gang at bay whilst her husband escaped out of the window. Unfortunately, he didn't get very far before he was captured, along with their son Ralph, and both were pressed again into service on another HMS boat, which was this time the Lyra. And this boat was waiting for them in North Shields. So it is said that Cuthbert was a straggler, and this meant that he had departed from another ship, so we're presuming that he departed from the HMS Amelia at some point. Okay, so a huge crowd congregated at Peggy's Hall, and understandably the situation was a little bit tense, and tempers flared and a huge fight kicked off. At a point, it was said that a pistol was fired with a bullet passing through the lapel of the officer's coat. Whilst all this commotion was going on, where was Dorothy? Well, she was actually, in fact, hiding on the HMS Lyra. Presumably, she'd taken advantage of all the trouble and sneaked on board the ship with her husband and her son. She remained hidden for 3 days until she was discovered. The captain and crew wanted to dump her off the ship somewhere along the west coast of Africa. However, she was put to work in the sick bay as a nurse, and she dealt with the wounded soldiers. She did such a good job that she was allowed to stay on board with her family, often being used as a powder monkey in addition to nursing duties, which meant that she supplied gunpowder to the cannons during the battle. Okay, so Dorothy and her husband were involved in numerous major sea battles and would have been entitled to naval service medals. However, they never claimed them. Life was tough at sea, and sadly Ralph, the son, lost his life in August 1813 when he fell out of the rings of one of the ships and drowned. So in 1815, following the Battle of Waterloo, Dorothy and her husband were allowed to return home, where Dorothy received a pardon for her initial attempts to interfere with naval practices, and the family were also made exempt from any future press ganging. So Dorothy didn't take too kindly to the Royal Navy following her and her husband's discharge, despite the pardon and exemption from any future press ganging. So thereafter, she was the forefront in organising groups which prevented the Navy ships from docking in South Shields. and she was also known to lure vessels onto the rocks of the River Tyne, where she could board them and take their goods and give them to the poor of the town. So this won her many admirers for the rest of her life, and she championed the downs and outs of South Shields and continued to hide men under her petticoats from the press gangs. She was a famous poet and a storyteller at the marketplace in South Shields, where she would make up rhymes and stories about topical subjects such as the loss of the barge Dove of Sunderland, which ran aground in November 1836 when carrying Russians. So Cuthbert sadly died in 1856, and then Dorothy also died a year later in 1857 after suffering a massive attack of bronchitis, and she was 75. So that just shows how tough she was to reach the age of 75 in them times. So Dorothy's story didn't end there though. In the decades following her death, wild legends were passed down through the generations about her life and adventures, and in the 1920s a local playwright wrote about Dorothy, and he set it in 1832. This became a play, and it was lost until a written copy was discovered in 2004 in South Shields. So I am at a statue somewhere in South Shields. Do you know where I am and who I am standing next to? Is she really called Dorothy, or is she called something else? Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Graham. So I'm out and I'm on my way to my location with Dorothy. So I'm just giving you a little look at what's around us. Nothing but snow and grass really, but there is a landmark behind us that if you can see, you might know where I am. Right, so I'm on my way down now to Dorothy. Can you guess where I am yet?